Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a 29-year-old nurse practitioner who thought I knew what grief looked like until 8 months ago when my husband David died in a car accident. But that Saturday afternoon at my sister's baby shower, standing in her pastel-decorated living room surrounded by 50 guests, I learned there are wounds that cut deeper than death itself, because that's when Jessica, my own sister, grabbed the microphone meant for thank you speeches and said the words that shattered what was left of my world. This baby I'm carrying? It's David's child, and Sarah has been keeping his inheritance from his real family. The room went dead silent. Not the comfortable quiet of anticipation, but the suffocating silence of scandal dropping like a bomb. I watched 50 faces turn toward me in perfect synchronization, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock, to something that looked disturbingly like judgment. My coffee mug, David's favorite mug that I'd brought from home because I needed something of his with me, slipped from my numb fingers and shattered against the hardwood floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence. Jessica stood there, 7 months pregnant, one hand protectively cradling her belly while the other gripped that microphone like a weapon. Her voice was steady, practiced, like she'd rehearsed this moment. "I know this is shocking," she continued, her eyes never leaving mine. "But David and I had a relationship for 2 years before he passed. This baby deserves what's rightfully theirs." My throat felt like sandpaper. I tried to speak, tried to defend myself, but the words wouldn't come. How do you respond to something so impossible, so utterly insane, that your brain can't even process it? I looked around the room desperately, searching for an ally. Someone who would say what I couldn't, that this was crazy, that Jessica was lying, that my husband of 5 years wouldn't have betrayed me with my own sister. But instead, I saw doubt creeping across familiar faces. Mrs. Henderson from down the street was whispering to her daughter. David's coworker Mark was staring at his shoes. Even my cousin Lisa, who'd been my maid of honor, was looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time and didn't like what she discovered. "Sarah," my mother's voice cut through the silence, and I turned toward her with relief flooding my chest. Finally, someone would speak up for me, would tell Jessica to stop this madness. But when I met my mother's eyes, I didn't see the fierce protection I expected. Instead, I saw uncertainty. "Honey, maybe we should talk about this privately." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My own mother was giving credence to this insanity. "Mom," I whispered, my voice cracking, "you can't possibly believe—" "I'm not saying I believe anything," she said quickly, but her tone was careful, diplomatic. The tone you use when you're trying not to take sides. "I'm just saying that if Jessica is telling the truth, then maybe we need to consider what's fair for everyone involved." Fair for everyone involved. As if stealing my dead husband's memory and destroying my life was a matter of fairness. As if 8 months of grieving, of learning to sleep alone, of talking to David's grave every Sunday was just one side of some equation that needed balancing. Jessica's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. "I have proof," she announced, and the room's attention snapped back to her. "Text messages, photos of us together, receipts from the hotel where we—" She paused, placing her hand over her heart in a gesture of false modesty. "Where this baby was conceived." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab that microphone and tell everyone that Jessica had always been jealous of my relationship with David, that she'd made inappropriate comments at family gatherings, that David himself had complained about her weird energy around him. But the faces staring back at me weren't the faces of people ready to listen to my side. They were the faces of people who'd already decided that where there's smoke, there's fire. One by one, guests started making their excuses. "I should get going," became the soundtrack of my humiliation. "Early morning tomorrow." "Babysitter can't stay late." "Thanks for having us, Jessica." They hugged my sister, avoided my eyes, and filed out like they were fleeing a crime scene, which, I suppose, they were. By the time the last guest left, only family remained. My parents, Jessica, and me, standing in a room still decorated with pink and blue balloons that now felt like they were mocking me. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, broken only by the sound of Jessica's grandfather clock. David's grandfather clock, actually, since Jessica had asked to borrow it after the funeral and never returned it. "Jessica," I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "How could you do this? How could you lie about David like this?" She turned to face me fully, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker across her features. Guilt, maybe, or shame. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "I'm not lying, Sarah. I know this is hard for you to accept, but David and I were in love. He was going to leave you." "That's not true." The words came out stronger than I felt. "David would never—" "Wouldn't he?" Jessica's voice took on a cruel edge. "You were so focused on your career, always working late shifts at the hospital. When was the last time you two had a real conversation? When was the last time you made him feel like he mattered?" The accusations hit their mark because they contained just enough truth to sting. David and I had been going through a rough patch before he died. We'd been married for 5 years, and yes, we'd fallen into routines. Yes, I'd been taking extra shifts to save money for the house we wanted to buy. Yes, we'd had arguments about spending time together. But that didn't mean he was having an affair. That didn't mean he would betray me with my own sister. "Even if things weren't perfect between us," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, "David wasn't a cheater, and he certainly wasn't a liar." "People aren't always who we think they are," my father interjected quietly. He was standing by the window, not looking at any of us. "Sometimes we see what we want to see." His words felt like a slap. "Dad, you know David. You know what kind of man he was." "I thought I did," he said, finally turning toward me. "But Jessica has evidence, Sarah, and that baby—" He gestured toward Jessica's belly. "That baby needs a father's support, even if he's gone." I stared at my father in disbelief. This was the man who'd walked me down the aisle, who'd told David at our wedding that he was gaining not just a wife, but a son. This was the man who'd cried at David's funeral and told me that David was one of the best men he'd ever known. Now, he was questioning David's character based on my sister's lies. "What evidence?" I demanded, turning back to Jessica. "Show me this proof you claim to have." Jessica exchanged a look with our parents, a look that made my stomach drop. It was the look of people who'd already discussed this, who'd already made decisions without me. "Sarah," she said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she'd used when we were kids, and she was explaining why she deserved the bigger piece of cake. "I know this is difficult, but denying it won't change anything. This baby is David's, and they deserve half of his estate." Half of his estate. There it was. The real reason behind this charade. David's life insurance payout, our savings account, the small inheritance he'd received from his grandmother. It wasn't about love or relationships or even the baby. It was about money. "You want his money," I said, the pieces clicking into place. "This whole thing is about David's inheritance." "This is about my child's future," Jessica shot back, but I could see the flush creeping up her neck, the telltale sign that she was caught. "This baby deserves financial security." "From their actual father," I said, "not from lies about a man who can't defend himself." Jessica's face hardened. "You always thought you were better than me, didn't you, Sarah? The perfect daughter with the perfect husband and the perfect life. Well, your perfect husband wasn't so perfect after all." The cruelty in her voice, the satisfaction she seemed to take in my pain, revealed something I'd never seen in my sister before, or maybe something I'd chosen not to see. This wasn't just about money or even jealousy. This was about power. The power to destroy my life, to rewrite history, to make herself the victim and me the villain. "I think you should leave," my mother said quietly, and for a moment, hope bloomed in my chest. Finally, Mom was going to tell Jessica to stop this madness. But then I realized she was looking at me. "I should leave?" I repeated, sure I'd misheard. "Just for tonight," Mom said quickly, "until we can all calm down and figure out how to handle this situation." Handle this situation? I felt like I was in some alternate reality where everything I'd believed about my family, about my life, had been turned upside down. "Mom, Jessica is lying about my dead husband. She's trying to steal his money by claiming he's the father of her baby. There's no situation to handle. There's just the truth. We don't know what the truth is yet, my father said, but we need to be fair to everyone involved, including that baby. Fair to everyone involved. There was that phrase again, like some kind of family motto I'd never learned. Since when was fairness more important than loyalty? Since when did my own parents need evidence to choose between their daughters? I looked around the room one more time, at Jessica with her triumphant smile, at my parents with their careful neutrality, at the remnants of a baby shower that had become my public execution. My wedding ring, David's ring that I still wore on a chain around my neck, felt heavy against my chest. I touched it through my shirt, remembering the day he'd put it on my finger, the promises we'd made, the life we'd built together that Jessica was now trying to steal. Fine, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'll leave. But Jessica? I turned to face my sister one last time. David's memory deserves better than your lies, and when the truth comes out, and it will come out, I hope destroying our family was worth whatever you think you're going to gain from this. I walked out of that house carrying nothing but my purse and the broken pieces of my heart. Behind me, I could hear my mother calling my name, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't, because if I looked back, if I saw doubt instead of support in her eyes one more time, I wasn't sure I'd survive it. As I sat in my car in their driveway, hands shaking too badly to start the engine, I made myself a promise. Jessica thought she could rewrite history, thought she could steal David's legacy and destroy my life with her lies. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated how far I'd go to protect the memory of the man I loved. I had something Jessica didn't know about, something that would expose her lies and reveal the truth about who David really was and what she'd really been to him. The documents were waiting in my safety deposit box, filed away after David's death along with his will and insurance papers. I'd put them there because they were painful, because they represented a side of our life together that I'd wanted to forget. But now, those papers weren't just painful memories. They were weapons, and tomorrow I was going to use them. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying Jessica's words, the doubt in my parents' eyes, the way 50 people had looked at me like I was suddenly a stranger. But more than anything, I kept thinking about those documents in my safety deposit box, the ones I'd filed away 8 months ago because they were too painful to look at, too private to share, too devastating to remember. By 7 a.m., I was dressed and driving to First National Bank. My hands were steady now, my purpose clear. If Jessica wanted to play games with David's memory, she was about to learn that some games have consequences she never saw coming. The safety deposit box felt heavier than usual as I carried it to the private viewing room. Inside, beneath David's will and our marriage certificate, was a manila folder I'd hoped never to open again. Medical records from Mercy General Hospital dated 3 years ago, the accident that had changed everything. David's vasectomy consultation notes from Dr. Martinez were right on top. Patient requests permanent sterilization following motorcycle accident complications, the report read. Testicular trauma has resulted in severely compromised fertility. Patient opts for vasectomy to prevent false hopes of conception. The procedure date was clear, March 15, 2021, 2 full years before Jessica claimed their affair had begun. Beneath that were David's private journal entries from his recovery period, pages I'd found after his death, pages that revealed how devastated he'd been about our inability to have children, how guilty he'd felt for taking that future away from me. But there was something else in those entries, something that made my blood run cold. Jessica came by again today while Sarah was at work. One entry read, "She keeps bringing food and asking personal questions about our marriage. It makes me uncomfortable. She asked if Sarah and I were trying for babies, and when I explained about the accident, she got this weird look in her eyes. I need to talk to Sarah about setting some boundaries." Another entry, dated 6 months later. Jessica showed up at my office today. She was crying, saying she was pregnant, and the father had abandoned her. She kept saying she wished she'd found someone like me, someone who would take care of her properly. I told her she needed to talk to her family, not me. This is getting inappropriate. The final entry, just 3 weeks before David's death, made my hands tremble. I'm going to have to tell Sarah about Jessica's behavior. Yesterday, she cornered me at Mom and Dad's house and actually kissed me. When I pushed her away, she said she knew I wanted her too, that she could give me the family Sarah couldn't. I told her she was delusional and that if she ever touched me again, I'd file a restraining order. She laughed and said no one would believe me because she's the innocent little sister. I'm starting to think she's not as innocent as everyone believes. I sat in that sterile bank room, reading my dead husband's words, and felt pieces of a puzzle I'd never known existed clicking into place. Jessica hadn't been carrying on an affair with David. She'd been stalking him, harassing him, living in a fantasy where his kindness was love and his politeness was encouragement. But David's journal wasn't the only evidence in that folder. There were text messages, screenshots David had saved to his cloud account, messages I'd found when I was going through his digital files to close his accounts, messages from Jessica that made my skin crawl. Thinking about you tonight. Sarah's so lucky to have someone who cares. I dreamed about us again. Do you ever think about what could have been? I know you can't say it, but I see the way you look at me. When you're ready to be honest about your feelings, I'll be waiting. David's responses were polite but firm. Jessica, this is inappropriate. I'm married to your sister. Please don't send messages like this anymore. I'm going to show these to Sarah if you don't stop. The final text thread was dated just 1 week before David's accident. Jessica, I know you think you love her, but love shouldn't feel like a burden. I could make you happy. David, Jessica, I'm blocking your number. This harassment ends now. If you contact me again, I'm filing a police report. Jessica, you'll regret this, David. You'll see what you lost when it's too late. I photographed every page, every text message, every medical record, but I needed more than David's voice to expose Jessica's lies. I needed living witnesses, people who could testify to what they'd seen and heard. My first stop was Dr. Martinez's office. As David's physician, he couldn't discuss details without a court order, but I wasn't asking for confidential information. I was asking him to confirm what was already documented in the medical records I legally possessed as David's widow. Mrs. Thompson, Dr. Martinez said when I explained why I was there. I remember your husband very well. Such a difficult situation for both of you. He looked at the medical records I'd brought, his expression growing serious. Yes, these are accurate. David underwent the vasectomy procedure in March 2021. The testicular trauma from his motorcycle accident had already rendered him effectively sterile, but he wanted the additional certainty. Doctor, would it have been medically possible for David to father a child any time after March 2021? His answer was unequivocal. Absolutely not. The procedure was successful, and we conducted follow-up tests to confirm 0 sperm count. Your husband could not have fathered a child after that date. I had him write a formal statement confirming David's sterility, properly notarized and signed. 1 witness down, but I needed more. My next stop was David's workplace, Morrison & Associates Accounting. His best friend Jake still worked there, and I'd always wondered why he'd seemed so distant at the funeral, so uncomfortable around me. Now, I thought I might know why. Sarah, Jake said when I appeared at his office door. I wasn't expecting, how are you holding up? I need to ask you about Jessica, I said without preamble, about her behavior around David before he died. Jake's face immediately closed off, the professional mask sliding into place. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. David told you about the harassment, didn't he? About the inappropriate text messages and the way she kept showing up at his office? Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Finally, he looked up at me with guilt written all over his face. He made me promise not to tell you. He didn't want to cause problems between you and your family. Jake, Jessica is claiming David was having an affair with her. She's saying her baby is his child and demanding half his inheritance. I need you to tell me what really happened. The words came out in a rush, like Jake had been holding them back for months. She was stalking him, Sarah. That's the only word for it. She'd show up here 2, sometimes 3 times a week, bringing him lunch, asking the receptionist when he'd be back from meetings, David was mortified. He started parking in the back lot so she wouldn't see his car from the street. Did you ever witness any of these encounters? God, yes. One time I was in his office when she just walked in, didn't even knock. She was wearing this low-cut dress and kept leaning over his desk, touching his arm. When I cleared my throat to remind them I was there, she got this angry look, like I'd interrupted something romantic instead of witnessing her make David visibly uncomfortable. Jake reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. He asked me to keep this, said if anything ever happened to him, I should make sure someone knew the truth about Jessica's behavior. I should have given it to you after the funeral, but I was trying to respect his wish not to hurt your family. Inside the envelope were more printed text messages, along with a handwritten note from David. Jake, if something happens to me, please make sure Sarah knows that Jessica has been harassing me for months. I never encouraged her behavior, and I certainly never had any kind of relationship with her. She's been living in a fantasy that I've tried repeatedly to shut down. Protect Sarah from her lies. David. I sat in my car outside David's office building, reading his final protective words, and felt both heartbroken and vindicated. David had known. Somehow, he'd sensed that Jessica's obsession might not end with his death, and he'd tried to protect me even from beyond the grave. But I still needed one more piece of evidence, proof that Jessica's baby couldn't possibly be David's, even if he hadn't been sterile. I needed to know who the real father was. That's when I remembered something Jessica had let slip during one of our family dinners 6 months ago. She'd mentioned going to therapy sessions twice a week, but when pressed for details, she'd been vague and defensive. At the time, I'd assumed she was seeing a counselor for emotional support. Now I wondered if those therapy sessions were something else entirely. I drove to the strip mall across town where I'd once picked Jessica up from what she'd called her appointment. Sure enough, there was a massage therapy clinic, Serenity Spa and Wellness. I parked and waited, feeling slightly ridiculous for staking out my sister like some kind of private investigator. I didn't have to wait long. At 3 p.m., Jessica's car pulled into the parking lot. I watched her walk into the spa, her movements confident and familiar. This was clearly a regular routine. 20 minutes later, she emerged, but she wasn't alone. A man followed her out, tall and dark-haired, about Jessica's age. He walked her to her car, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. When she turned to face him, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. Not the kiss of a massage therapist saying goodbye to a client, but the intimate kiss of a man saying goodbye to his pregnant girlfriend. I took photos from my car, then waited for him to get into his own vehicle so I could follow him. The license plate led me to Marcus Rivera, licensed massage therapist, and, according to the business registration, I looked up on my phone, co-owner of Serenity Spa. That evening, I sat in my apartment, the small place I'd moved to after David's death because our house held too many memories, and spread all my evidence across the dining table. David's medical records proving his sterility, his journal entries documenting Jessica's harassment, text messages showing her escalating inappropriate behavior, Jake's witness statement and David's final note, photos of Jessica with Marcus Rivera. The picture was devastatingly clear. Jessica had been obsessed with my husband, had harassed him for months while he tried to spare my feelings by handling it himself. When he'd finally threatened to expose her behavior, she'd responded with that chilling final text. "You'll regret this. You'll see what you lost when it's too late." David's death in that car accident must have seemed like a gift to Jessica, the perfect opportunity to rewrite history, to create the fantasy relationship she'd always believed existed. And now, pregnant by her actual boyfriend, she saw a chance to make her delusion profitable. But her plan had one fatal flaw. David had been too good a man to let her destroy me, even after his death. He'd left me everything I needed to expose her lies. The next morning, I called a family meeting. I told my parents and Jessica that I had some things to discuss regarding David's estate, and that I thought it would be best if we could resolve everything before involving lawyers. They agreed to meet at my parents' house that afternoon. I arrived with a briefcase full of documents and a tablet loaded with photographs. Jessica was already there, sitting in Mom's favorite armchair with her hands resting on her belly, looking for all the world like the wronged woman seeking justice for her unborn child. Thank you all for coming, I said, setting my briefcase on the coffee table. I've been doing some research into Jessica's claims, and I think it's time we cleared up some misunderstandings. Jessica's face immediately hardened. There's nothing to clear up, Sarah. I've told you the truth. Have you? I opened my briefcase and pulled out Dr. Martinez's medical statement. Because, according to David's physician, it would have been medically impossible for David to father a child any time after March 2021. I handed the document to my father, watching his face as he read. The doubt that had been lurking in his eyes since yesterday's confrontation was replaced by confusion, then growing alarm. What does this mean? Mom asked, looking between Jessica and me. It means David had a vasectomy 3 years ago, I said clearly, following complications from his motorcycle accident. He was sterile, Mom. Completely, medically, permanently unable to father children. Jessica shot to her feet, her face flushed. That's impossible. You're lying. Dr. Martinez is prepared to testify to this in court, I continued calmly. But that's not all. I pulled out David's journal entries and began reading aloud the passages about Jessica's inappropriate behavior, her unwanted advances, her harassment of my husband. With each word, Jessica grew paler, but she maintained her defiance. Those could be fake. Anyone could have written those. You're right, I agreed. Anyone could have written journal entries. But what about these? I pulled out my tablet and began showing the text messages. Jessica's increasingly desperate attempts to seduce my husband. David's clear rejections. His final threat to file a police report. Still not convinced, I asked, watching my parents' faces as the truth began to sink in. Then maybe this will help. I showed them the photos of Jessica with Marcus Rivera, the intimate kiss, the possessive body language of a man with his pregnant girlfriend. Who is that, Jessica? My father asked quietly. Jessica's defiance finally cracked. She sank back into the chair, tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of rage, not remorse. You don't understand, she said. David led me on. He made me believe. He made you believe what? I interrupted. That being polite to his sister-in-law meant he wanted to have an affair? That trying to protect my feelings by not telling me about your harassment meant he was interested in you? He could have had me, Jessica said, her voice venomous. He could have had someone who actually appreciated him instead of a wife who was never home, who couldn't even give him children. The cruelty of that statement, thrown at me in my parents' living room while I was still grieving my husband, revealed the depth of Jessica's delusion and resentment. She'd convinced herself that my marriage was flawed, that David was unhappy, that she could have made him happier if only he'd been smart enough to choose her. Jessica, my mother said, her voice barely above a whisper, how could you lie about something like this? How could you use David's death, Sarah's grief, to— She couldn't finish the sentence. I wasn't lying about my feelings, Jessica shot back. David meant something to me. This baby? She gestured to her belly. This baby could have been his if he'd just opened his eyes and seen what was right in front of him. But it's not his baby, I said. It's Marcus Rivera's baby, the man you've been seeing for over a year, according to the business records at Serenity Spa. The man who's actually been supporting you financially, which explains how you've been able to afford your new apartment and car on a part-time income. The final piece of Jessica's facade crumbled. The fantasy she'd built around David, the lies she'd told herself and others, the elaborate scheme to steal his inheritance, all of it collapsed under the weight of documented truth. My father was the first to speak. Jessica, I think you need to leave. And I think you owe your sister an apology that no words could possibly cover. But Jessica wasn't done fighting. She stood up, her face twisted with a rage I'd never seen before. You think you've won, don't you, Sarah? You think you can just destroy my life and walk away clean? I think, I said quietly, that David deserves to rest in peace without his memory being used to cover for your lies. I think his legacy deserves better than being part of your scheme to steal money from his widow, and I think our family deserves the truth, even when it's ugly. Jessica grabbed her purse and headed for the door, but turned back for one final shot. You may have your precious evidence, but you'll never have what I had with David. You'll never know what it felt like to be truly wanted by him." "You're right," I said. "I'll never know what that feels like because David never wanted you. Not once, not ever. But I know what it felt like to be truly loved by him, to be chosen by him every single day, to build a real life with him instead of living in a fantasy. And that's something you can never steal from me, no matter how hard you try." After Jessica left, my parents and I sat in the wreckage of what we'd discovered. The sister and daughter we thought we knew had been living a lie so elaborate, so damaging, that it had nearly destroyed what remained of our family after David's death. "I'm sorry," my mother said, reaching for my hand. "I'm so sorry we doubted you, even for a moment." "I'm sorry, too," my father added. "David was a good man, and you deserved our support, not our suspicion." I squeezed my mother's hand, feeling the first peace I'd known since that terrible moment at the baby shower. David left me everything I needed to protect his memory and expose Jessica's lies. Even in death, he was still taking care of me. 6 months later, I had my life back. Jessica's baby was born healthy and beautiful, and DNA testing confirmed Marcus Rivera as the father. They're together now, trying to build something real out of the ashes of Jessica's fantasy. I hope they succeed, for the baby's sake. My relationship with my parents has healed, though we all carry scars from Jessica's deception. They've learned that sometimes the truth is more important than keeping the peace, and I've learned that family loyalty should never come at the expense of justice. I still wear David's wedding ring on a chain around my neck, but not because I'm stuck in the past. I wear it because it represents something Jessica could never understand: real love, built on truth and trust and daily choice. The ring isn't a symbol of possession or fantasy. It's a symbol of the genuine connection David and I shared, the life we built together, and the future we would have had if fate hadn't intervened. Jessica tried to steal David's legacy, but she failed. His memory belongs to the people who truly knew him, who loved him for who he actually was, rather than who they wished he could be. And that's a truth no amount of lies or schemes or delusions can ever change. If you've ever been silenced by someone else's version of your story, if you've ever had your truth questioned by the people who should believe you most, know this: the truth has a way of surfacing, even when it seems buried forever. David taught me that, even after death. Sometimes the evidence you need is waiting in the last place you want to look, protected by the love of someone who saw the future clearly enough to prepare for it. Your truth matters. Your story matters. And somewhere, someone is keeping the evidence you'll need to prove it.